Breakout Normandy, a game that was published by Avalon Hill in 1993, so right before the great crisis of the board gaming market, before the renaissance that we're experiencing in the 21st century. But nevertheless, a game that has been considered a classic of modern wargaming almost ever since it was published. The topic, obviously, is the invasion of Normandy, the early days of that invasion from D-Day, and, well, depending on whether you want to play the standard game or the standard game, indicate the following period, the early periods in the invasion of France, as the Allies are trying to establish a presence on the European continent, and then they start pushing, trying to achieve precisely a breakout in the defensive lines that the Germans are trying to create around them. It's a two-player game, but also perfectly suitable for solitaire gaming. It is an area impulse game, as you can see from this depiction here of the map. Complexity is low, and probably would also seem low if the rulebook was written a little bit better. The rulebook is a little confusing, information is scattered in ways and in places where it's not intuitive to look for it, so it makes the game look more complex than it is. Once you get used to it, especially if you already know where impulse games, then it is very easy to learn the game. Even if you are a first-time wargamer or very inexperienced wargamer, just give it a little bit of time. You'll figure out a way. You'll grow up the rulebook at some point without even too much effort. At that point, you can play the game. Question is it a good game to play? Does it deserve the status of modern classic that it has achieved? We'll talk about that in the conclusions of this video. But first, let's have a look at the game. This is the board of the game. It is actually a double board. Both boards are mounted and they are placed adjacent to one another on the table. They form this unusual configuration, this L-shaped configuration that you do not see very often in games, but that is, of course, perfect to represent the area of operations here. And when you put the two boards together, they cover quite a large area. And as you may have noticed, I'm kind of trying to avoid that glare there, but with an area so large, it's kind of hard to find an angle where there isn't one of the lights in this room that is reflecting on the surface. Nice looking map, very functional, divided in areas. This is an area impulse game, and areas have two numbers in their central area. The top one is used to simply identify the area when you are setting up the game, and the area at the bottom has a modifier which is used by the defender of the area in combat. Some areas also have a victory point value, like you can see there. The German player, as you can imagine, starts with his units set up mainly along the coast and here in the peninsula. Cherbourg is a very important objective. That's the German player trying to prevent the ally from taking, or at least from sealing off, from isolating. And the ally player starts with no units on the board. The game starts with a special turn, as so many games featuring D-Days, with special rules and procedures for that event. So first, the ally player will place some units representing the paratroopers that paradropped on the continent before the main operation. Then later you have bombardment, and finally you land your units on these boxes that represent the different beaches. That's the LA player is trying to control and to turn into beachheads. Now, as for the units in the game, units may be units that are used for bombardment only. For example, here we have pieces that are used for naval bombardment and for air bombardment, respectively. Most units, however, are land units, and they come in three flavors. Infantry, different types of infantry, rangers also, for example, armor, and field artillery. And these pieces have three values on them. Attack value, defense value, and movement value. The Germans also have some coastal artillery that looks a little different, has some unique rules, but this is the main idea. So the pieces will be on the board, and then players during a turn will alternate activating units. Activating units in what the rulebook describes as micro turns, as impulses. I'm just throwing some random things there. Don't blame me if, oh, they don't make sense according to setup instructions. I don't know. I haven't checked them. Not now. Now, the game, as I said, is played in mini turns called impulses. So there will be a counter on the impulse track. Every time that a player takes an impulse, the counter on that track is moved by 1. The counter is also used to represent advantage. One side will always have advantage. By spending it, or better circumstances, the advantage will switch to the other player. For example, massive losses will force you, if you had the advantage, to give it to the other player. An advantage can be spent voluntarily, and when it's spent also it goes to the other player. And when you spend the advantage, you get several possible advantages. The main ones is that you get to reroll a die result. So each time that a player plays an impulse, the impulse is recorded here. Also, during the allied impulse, the first die roll that the allied player does is counted as the die roll to check if the day is over or if another impulse will be played. Each turn divided in impulses represents a single day. If the die roll, the first die roll that was rolled during an allied turn for whatever reason, is lower than the present impulse value, then the turn is over. You move to the next turn as recorded on the turn track, and you start over. Well, there's first another phase, but the idea is that the main day of operations is over. If the die roll is equal to the present impulse number, then the weather changes. And of course, clear weather is good for the Allies because they get air support. Overcast weather is better for the Germans. They get many advantages, or at least they don't suffer from all the disadvantages that air superiority of the Allies causes them in clear weather time. If the die roll during the Allied turn is higher than the present impulse turn, nothing happens, and simply you continue like this. And you continue until, well, there will be a die roll that will be lower than, or simply the counter moves out of the impulse track. So it's really fun and interesting, as in many games that have this idea that you do not know exactly how long a turn is going to be. You may plan a lot, and the best laid plans of generals and mice, they may not go the way you expect them. When it is your impulse, you can take one or two possible impulses: a bombardment impulse or an assault impulse. In the bombardment impulse, simply you use your units that are able to bombard: artillery, field artillery, air artillery, whatever it is that you have available you want to use, and you use it to attack an area. But the majority of turns really are assault impulses, which are when you activate an area where you have units, and the units in that area can move and or assault. And or because it may be that units are starting a turn in an area that already contains enemy units, in case they were there from previous turns, then it may be that you simply decide to assault. Movements, you spend movement points to move from an area to the other. The majority of things that affect movement is presence of enemy units and the state of the enemy units. If you have strong, fresh enemy units, that's going to cost a lot of movement points. Also, as you can see, these connections here, these are bridges. This is very important. The rules about bridges in the rulebook are explained in a somewhat nebulous way, I found, only just because the rules about bridges are all over the place before you figure out that there's an overview at the end. The bridges can be in one or two or three states. They can be held by the Germans when there is no marker on them, may be destroyed when you place this marker here, or may be controlled by the Allies, in which case you place this marker here to cover them. Attacking across a bridge held by an opponent gives you a penalty, so very often you will want to attempt to seize a bridge before you move. There's a procedure to do that. before you attack, and the German player will often try to destroy bridges in areas that are threatened. If you activate an area, you can try to destroy the bridges that connect the activated area with areas where there are enemy units. And again, you roll a die, you roll dice, and if you're successful, if you roll 7 or more, you place that marker there, and now of course it will cost much more for the ally player to attempt to cross that river. And on the plus side, the ally player also has procedures to try to rebuild the bridges that were destroyed. So when you activate an area for an assault, you move and or attack and or fight. Combat is mandatory when you're entering an area with some units that was not contested before, that only contained enemy units. In other cases, it is not mandatory. Combat. How do you resolve combat? As the attacker, suppose the allies are the attackers, you select one unit in the area to be the point unit, and you use the full attack value of the point unit. Then you add modifiers. You add 1 point for each supporting unit that is participating also to the attack. You have +1 for each field artillery unit that is supporting also. Divisional integrity. If 3 or more units from a single division are participating to the attack, you get a +1. The allies automatically get a +1 because of the air support in clear weather turns. So you see, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good deal for the allies. So you total all of the modifiers of the attacker, point unit, modifiers. You roll 2d6s. You also add that, and that gives you the total attack value. The defender also rolls 2 dice, and to the result of the roll, they add the value of 1 unit that they decide to declare the forward unit, +1 for supporting defending units, plus terrain modifier, which is printed on the map and changes, of course, depending on the area, plus other modifiers based on the border that was crossed by the enemy during an attack, if the border had a river, if it had a bridge, if it had a bridge that was held by the opponent or not held by the opponent. There's a series of modifiers based on that. At the end of that, you compare the total attack of the attacker and the total defense value of the defender. If the attack total is higher than the defense total, the defender needs to take casualty points equal to the difference between the two values. Casualty points can be paid for or absorbed by spending enemy units. A unit is spent when it goes when it's flipped to its backside, or you absorb casualty points by adding disruption to a spent unit, by adding a disruption 2 level to a unit that was a disruption 1 level of disruption, retreating units, eliminating units that are disruption 2. Of course, you cannot retreat and then eliminate a unit because it looks weird. It just looks like the people committed suicide out of shame after they retreated. What's that? That's crazy. So, there is flexibility there in the way that you can take your casualties because they can be absorbed in different ways. Some units retreat, some units are destroyed, some units are disrupted, etc., etc. So it's a lot of interesting options there. If the two results are the same, attack total and defense total are the same, there's a stalemate. So the point unit is spent and also receives a level of disruption, and all units participating to the attack are also spent. If there was a failure, the defense total was higher, then all of the units of the attacker become disrupted, and in a mandatory assault, they also need to retreat. In any case, after you activate a unit for movement or for combat, the unit becomes spent. So basically, if you're attacking, you're successful, your attacking units in any case all become spent. If you attack and you're unsuccessful, they simply, they become spent and they also get disrupted. This is the general idea. Now, So that also means that as the day progresses and units are moving around and doing stuff, fighting, etc., etc., the lucky ones that did something only get spent. The unlucky ones also get disrupted at various levels of disruption. In many games of this kind, at the end of the turn, here will be at the end of the day, you get to flip back all of your units automatically. Not so quickly here, not so easy. In this game, players receive supply points that are given to them through depots of this type. So players have depot markers representing a number of supply points or refit points that they can use. You can see there are specific locations where these points can be placed. The German player can place them in specific units, in specific areas on the board, and then they can be transported. Basically, by putting a marker in a certain area, you can then spend points to refit your units. To unspend, or say to refresh a unit that is in the same area and not disrupted, takes a refit or a supply point. For each intervening border, it takes an extra supply point. So the far you go, the far you have to transport your resources, the more you're spending them for transportation rather than for refitting. And refitting or reducing a level of disruption on a disrupted unit costs an extra supply point. So you have to spend your supplies well, and you cannot improve your units more than a level per turn. So if a unit is spent and down to disruption 2, it's gonna be a while before it goes through all of the cycle to go back to be, well, disruption 1, from disruption 2, disruption 1, spent but not disrupted, fresh. And that is if the unit doesn't take any more damage and if you have been able to supply it every turn. Really interesting idea. It adds a little bit of complexity. It adds more procedures than in games where you're simply flipping back all of your units to their fresh side at the end of a turn. But definitely interesting because it adds more decisions and challenges and tough moments. And again, tough choices for the players. The allied player wins the game by achieving a complete breakthrough, which means by exiting units from the southern border of the map. Well, the definition is to take control of these zones here, which are abstract zones representing the area southern of the board. So as you can see, there are numbers there that indicates the areas that rectangle is connected to. So from that rectangle you could move to 12 or to 4, and since 12 and 4 are here, that effectively means to exit units through the southern border of the map, or from that edge there, because also having control of those zones means to have a breakthrough and means astounding victory for the ally player. If that astounding victory through a breakthrough is not achieved during the game, then the victory is decided by counting victory points for the ally player, and victory points are achieved by the ally player by controlling or isolating shortboard, by controlling areas on the map, and the German player can deny victory points by retaking control of beaches that the German player had turned into beachheads. Well, yeah, in my opinion, this game definitely deserves the popularity that it has among wargamers, because once you get past some of the nebulous aspects of the rulebook, it is definitely a game that is easy to play, that it moves fast, as so many area impulse games do. I mean, I like the system in general, I like this idea, I like this mechanics, because it keeps things tight. You do not have to wait for your opponent to take a long turn to move a whole long front of units before you react. It is interesting to do so in many cases because you're seeing as the action develops, you're getting excited about seeing what the opponent is trying to do. But of course, the back and forth is even faster and more interesting if indeed you're just activating an area, resolving those actions and you're in control of the actions, so you feel like that is pretty important. You set up an attack, you perform an attack, you perform a bombardment. It's fun stuff. And when it is not your turn and you're just sitting there waiting for your turn to come, it doesn't take too long for a player to resolve their turn. So when you're doing stuff, it's super fun, and when you're waiting, it is not too long. The back and forth is really intense, and in some cases it's really fast. If you're bombarding, it doesn't take long. Maybe a German player is just activating an area to blow up all of the bridges around them, not to move anybody out of there. So that also is particularly fast. The pace is really good. So that helps also keeping the tension up. You're always interested in what's happening. But of course, what really contributes to creating the tension is also the impulse system and the unpredictable end of the turn. Several games have used this system too. It always works. It always creates nail-biting moments because as the ally player, you would always want to have some extra turns, some extra impulses, because you need to push. You need to achieve objectives that are geographically distant. So you need to cover ground and you need time to do so. Short days are bad for you. And the opposite is true for the German player that doesn't score points per se. You can deny some points to the ally player directly by taking control of the beachheads, but mainly you're simply trying to prevent the opponent from scoring points to start with. So short days, short turns, the shorter the game is, the better it is for you. So there's this dynamic there, and of course the German player will always complain that the turns and the days are too long, and the LA player that they are too short, which is perfect. It means that the game works. It means that the game gives you enough things to do, enough clear objectives that are of similar value, similar interest, so that the decisions about them are interesting or exciting. They're not obvious, and yet at the same time you have limited time to achieve them, or too much time that you need to hold out and too much time that you need to fight against the superior numbers of the ally player. So the two forces fight in completely different ways, as you can expect from the theme, and maybe that is also one of the reasons why D-Day and the Normandy campaign is such a famously and often gamed theme in wargaming. Of course, probably also because we have many American publishers, American wargamers. That is a theme that is dear to Americans, but also because it is intrinsically an interesting theme, because you do have this disparity of forces. You do have one side that has numbers, that has strength, but also needs to achieve objectives fast, and it is advancing in punishing territory, absolutely painful territory to move through. And you have another side that is juggling many objectives, creating a line that becomes thinner and thinner and has to prioritize because the German player cannot defend everything. So it's a matter of slowing down, pacing your retreats and balancing retreats and losses, and figuring out the best ways to exploit the terrain, the best ways to blow up bridges and just hinder the advance of the opponent. The two psychologies of the two sides are completely different, which means when you mirror them into a game, you have a game that plays in different ways for the two players. Great replay value there. Even if you play as a solitaire, game, one day you will identify mainly as the allies, another day you will identify mentally as the defender. It is a game that offers a lot of replay value in that, but also a lot of replay value due to the fact that there are many different ways to go about your objectives. As the German player, you cannot defend everything. As the ally player, you cannot take everything. You cannot achieve breakthrough everywhere. So you have to prioritize, maybe to feign things a little bit, to launch a massive attack in one direction, attracting some defenses towards that area, then to actually try to puncture the enemy lines in another area, just because it is about controlling areas much more than it is intrinsically about destroying enemy units. Of course, destroying enemy units is the means to achieve that end, but it is so much about juggling the space. And this is an interesting map where the subdivision in areas creates interesting puzzles, interesting possible branches of decisions as the players may try to go towards Cherbourg in one game, or push towards the center of the map, push in the other direction, try to achieve multiple things, and then concentrate on only one in another game. The games will play differently depending on the side that you take, and also simply depending on the decisions that are made. As the German players, you have to an extent to dance to the music that the LA player has chosen. He's the DJ really, because you need to react to what the heck it is that they are doing. But of course, there may be cases where the LA player lowers their guards, and it happens that the weather is overcast, because as the German player counterattacking in clear weather, the negative modifiers are just really tough to overcome. Maybe it's overcast, maybe the ally player got distracted, used the refit points in a non-optimal way, then you see an opening that happens, then you punch back. But that's gonna be the exception rather than the rule. But it is still fun. It's a challenge that is very fun for both players. As the German player, you almost feel like you're always going to be overwhelmed. You're like one or two impulses, maybe that's one turn ahead for losing any integrity in your lines and having half of the American army march through your lines. As the American player, you always have the sense that you're close to achieve that, but somehow, like in those dreams where you are running towards something and that something is always there, doesn't get any closer, you always may have that sense there, and you always have the fear, in fact, that you may be overlooking something and offering an opportunity for the German player to punch back. Fun game. Easy once you figure out your way through the annoying rulebook. Easy to play, fast-paced, packed with interesting decisions, packed with tension. Pretty much all that you will want to have from a war game, really. Suitable for learning war gamers, for casual war gamers, for war gamers that have just started with the hobby, and definitely full of interesting ideas that will keep also the seasoned war gamers entertained. Breakout, Normandy, a classic on modern war gaming, and a classic that has achieved its status for very good reasons.